see, we ready to get started, or do we want to wait another minute?
And for some reason, Vlad is having trouble getting in, so.
Oh, okay.
So Cecilia, the link you sent, I was having trouble with it too.
You muted yourself, Eliza.
Thanks.
I'm sorry. No, I actually did it. Sorry about that.
Wonderful benefits of ADHD. So what I had trouble with the link as well. So what he may need to do is log into Zoom and then use the meeting ID in order to get in.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all for waiting. We're just waiting on one of our presenters. The joys of Zoom.
Right.
I'm just over here like, oh, all of my history friends, I've missed you.
Would it be okay, Cecilia, to start with my introduction while we wait for Vlad?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, great. I'll get us started. Welcome everyone tuning in from Bloomington and beyond. Thanks for joining us today for the Neurodiversity Teaching Strategies Workshop. This event is sponsored by the HGSA. Thanks to Brock for making the lovely event poster and helping advertise the event. And it's also sponsored by the Neurodiversity Coalition at IU. The mission of the Neurodiversity Coalition is to promote and foster a culture of inclusivity for neurodivergent individuals on IU's campus and within the greater community. In terms of the format today, we will start out with a video message from a neurodivergent student, Brenna Henning, who is also one of the presidents of the IU Neurodiversity Coalition, who will be sharing their perspective. And a trigger warning on the video that we'll be starting with, it will be testimony from them about ableist harassment from a professor. And so if you need to, you can mute the video audio for about 5 to 6 minutes and then tune back in. And then after that video, we will turn it over to Eliza to define neurodiversity, frame it within higher education, and think about the classroom from neurodivergent students' perspectives. Then we'll discuss teaching strategies for designing courses and running classroom environments that accommodate neurodiverse students. And we'll be having opportunities for Q&A moments throughout after each portion of the workshop, rather than holding all of the questions until the end. So as things occur to you, hold on to them and we'll get to them as we go. And you can use the chat or the raise hand function for questions, whatever you're comfortable with. And we should also have some time for questions at the end. As you may have noticed, this workshop is being recorded so that history grad students and faculty and others can view it later on. I also want to note that we'll be circulating PDFs of today's PowerPoints. They have a lot of great information and resources. And we'll be using the emails that you provided when you registered to send that out. So have a look out for that. Before introducing the panelists, I want to thank them for their time and labor in preparing this presentation. We really appreciate it. On our panel, we have Eliza May Brader. She is a Master's of Public Affairs candidate at the IU O'Neill School, studying disability law and policy. She is an activist and advocate for the disabled community. Eliza is neurodivergent in terms of ADHD. We also have Vlad Abramenko, who is an instructional systems developer. He is a PhD candidate in the School of Education, specializing in instructional systems technology with a minor in special education. Ayoka Wicks is a dual PhD student in US history and American studies. Their research is centered around Indigenous, domestic, and sexual violence survivors. Ayoka is neurodivergent in terms of autism and CPTSD. Cecilia Buckley is a research associate for the Indiana Institute on Disability and Community at Indiana University. She holds a master's degree in counseling psychology. Cecilia oversees training programs for vocational rehabilitation staff and provides technical assistance to special education teachers in Indiana. She identifies as neurodivergent from multiple perspectives and serves as the faculty advisor for the Neurodiversity Coalition at IU Bloomington. For those who don't know me, I'm Laura Merrill, and I'm a history PhD candidate. I work on the 19th century British Empire, specializing in masculinity, settler colonialism, and fatherhood. And with that, I will turn it over to Cecilia for the video.
Thank you so much, Laura. We're going to start out by sharing a little video clip of a story by an undergrad. Her name is Brenna Henning, and I think Laura already told you a little bit about this. Did you mention the trigger warning? I apologize.
Yes, I did.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to share the video now.
Not great time talking to one of my professors about accommodations. And this happened my fall semester of my freshman year. And I just ever since then has always had anxiety from it. From that, I
don't know what's happening. Let me try again. Not sure what happened to the video. I don't know. I think it's just my bandwidth isn't. I tested it out, but I think that there's a lot of bandwidth for this presentation, so I'm not sure what to do. I'm not sure if you would be able to share it, Laura, if you have it available. You're muted right now.
Yeah, I'll try. Just give me a sec.
Sure. And just check on that share sound when you share your screen. You probably know that, but thanks. I think that's a good suggestion, Leah. If you would turn off your video for this portion, it might help with the bandwidth to show the video. Thank you for that suggestion.
I'll try screen sharing mine and see if that works. Let's see.
My name's Brenna Henning, and I am a sophomore at IU studying psychology, and I am a co-president of the Neurodiversity Coalition on campus. I want to talk about my experience at.
Oh no. It looks like I ran into the same issue, Cecilia. We may have to move on to Eliza and see if we can get that figured out or sent later on.
Yeah, we could maybe send it later on. I think that's a good idea. Could I just summarize it
Sure.
I mean, it's more powerful to hear the story, obviously. But this is a situation where she had an accommodation from Disability Services that was given to her, and it was to have double time, I think, on testing. And the professor, one of her professors, gave her such a hard time about that and grilled her about it. Why did she have it? Why did she need it? Would she cheat? You know, did she have some kind of device that she was going to be cheating? Why should the professor give her that accommodation when other students would think that it was unfair? And hopefully, as you know, that's illegal. She has a legal, this is federal law. This is ADA, and we'll be talking about this in the presentation. And completely inappropriate and causing the student anxiety, not only with that professor and in that situation, but every time she goes to request accommodations, she runs into that anxiety about, is she going to be harassed? That's it.
Thanks, Cecilia. And we'll work on getting that video circulated. Maybe if we can move into Eliza's portion now.
Absolutely. Let me get my presentation up here and we will get started. Well, hello everyone. As Lauren said, my name is Eliza Brader, and I have ADHD and physical disabilities as well. But when I put on my academic cap, my research tends to focus on creating equity and justice for disabled people in higher education. So today, let's go ahead and get started here. And I apologize, my computer is a little slow. My agenda. I think first things first, we're going to talk about some societal barriers to accommodations. I'm a policy person, so I can't help myself. I think we need this policy context to understand kind of what our students are going through. Next, we're going to define neurodiversity and give some examples. After that, because they're so interlinked, we really have to talk about the medical model versus the social model of disability. And then we're going to talk about, what does neurodiversity look like? And really, what does neurodiversity feel like? I think we, as academicians, can be bad about talking about disability, but I think that empathy is a really powerful tool. And so by understanding what a neurodiverse student is kind of feeling in that classroom ecosystem, we can better help them and better know how to accommodate them. First things first, the ADA is a floor, not a ceiling. I think a great example of that is this wonderful ADA approved ramp that you can find. I believe this actually is from a university, but don't quote me on that. So, according to the Department of Education, only 35% of our disabled students who are in post-secondary school are going to actually register for their accommodations. In policy studies, we don't really know why this happens, although we have a few ideas of some contributing factors. First of all, it's important to remember that if it is a barrier to medical equity, it's going to be a barrier to disability accommodations. A student who is actually holding an accommodation memo has successfully navigated our medical system, successfully received a diagnosis for that disability, and then maintained documentation through their university years up to the point that they are speaking to you. So anything like race, socioeconomic status, right? Anything that can be a barrier to somebody getting access to medicine can actually be a barrier to them getting an accommodation. I think Another important thing to remember is that across the literature in social sciences and policy studies, our students report that professors and instructors in general are a major barrier to their accommodations. Students overall tend to be satisfied with the accommodations that are provided by their universities, except the ones that are provided directly in the classroom by instructors or professors. And, you know, again, I think that we are really bad about talking about disability to the point that it seems like it's something we are almost afraid of. But I think, like many irrational fears, education and understanding can help us heal some of that. So I hope we can help you better understand neurodiversity today. And I also hope that we can help you better accommodate and feel confident in supporting your students. What is neurodiversity? We've said it a few times here today, so it might be important for us to go ahead and define it. Neurodiversity is going to describe the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in a lot of different ways, right? And there is really no one right way to think or learn or behave. And the really important thing for you to capture in our context for neurodiversity is that our differences are not viewed as deficits. So I have to touch on this briefly. Another word you've probably heard me say. Disability, disabled. This is the word I use. It's the word activists have been using since the 1970s. It is a word that captures the social model of disability and helps focus on culture. If you have more questions about that, I highly recommend the documentary Crip Camp. Came out in 2020, produced by the Obamas. It is the history of disability rights in the United States, and I will also be happy to take questions after. So, models of disability. Here at the university, we're going to really operate under one model of disability, although social scientists tend to recognize kind of two. So here at IU, we operate under primarily the medical model of disability. And what the medical model is it's a way of conceptualizing disability that is going to assume that a disability in a person is a deficit or a negative thing. It believes that disability is a characteristic of a person. And most importantly, it's going to really try to fix this deficit, right? And this fixing is typically going to be viewed as the job of medical professionals, other people. Although on occasion, that job can be put on educators and sometimes professors or instructors. Now, what advocates and activists and what we're kind of going to be operating under today is the social model of disability. Now, the social model of disability assumes that a disability is a neutral difference. Just like any other protected status, it can come along with challenges, but it is not an inherently negative thing. More than that, the social model makes this funny move where it believes that disability exists in the relationship between people and society. So I am disabled, not because I have ADHD, but because I live in a world and go to a school and operate under laws that do not accommodate that ADHD. It believes that something is inherently wrong about the way that I think and act and behave. And that therein, in that challenge, is where the disability lies. So the social model says we need to try to change society to be more inclusive and understanding of those of us with differences. Fixing, essentially, is going to be everybody's job by challenging our internalized ableism and trying to create more open and effective structures that work for everybody. And we'll get more into that in Ioka's presentation. So, a few examples of neurodiversity. Now, for the sake of time, I can't read all of these out to you. We'd be here for a while. But I really do encourage you to take a look at these. especially if you have students who have some of these neurodiversities. A lot of these things can get overlooked as neurodiversities, but they do affect the ways that people think and interact with the world. Now, some challenges caused by neurodiversity. Before we get into this, I want to start by saying neurodiversity is a really broad and varied thing. It is different for everybody who experiences it, even people with the same conditions. These are some challenges that we identified that tend to be overlooked or under-accommodated in the classroom. And so that's why we've chosen to talk about these today. But again, we can't ever encompass all of the challenges that people who are neurodiverse or neurodiverse people face. We're going to talk about executive functioning. We're going to talk about sensory processing and sensitivities, communication differences, and some social differences. And communication differences and social differences, I'll make a distinction between. Communication differences, just for my purposes, we're going to talk about kind of the one-on-one challenges students may face. And a social difference is going to refer more to the larger classroom ecosystem. So, executive functioning. This is something that I know I struggle with as a person with ADHD, even in grad school. Executive functioning is going to look like, well, let's define it. Executive functioning is what it is it refers to the cognitive and mental abilities that help people engage in goal-directed action. So people like me with executive dysfunction are going to struggle to organize and regulate our behavior around or in ways that will help us accomplish our long-term goals, right? So what this may look like to you is you may have students who miss assignments regularly or turn in assignments late, students who don't respond to emails at all or in a timely manner. You may have students who appear disorganized, students who are late or miss class altogether, and students that just seem generally overwhelmed, which I mean, who isn't overwhelmed in academia today, but having executive dysfunction adds an extra layer to that. Now, what it feels like for those of us who deal with it, sorry, my PowerPoint is misbehaving. What it can feel like is overwhelm, right? So an executive dysfunction feels like my brain is telling me that the task in front of me is impossible. Responding to that email may take 5 minutes and may look like a molehill to you, but for me, it feels like a mountain. This isn't something I can control. It's just a part of my neurodiversity. And this kind of cognitive dissonance we experience can leave us feeling really frustrated, right? As frustrating as it is for you when we, exhibit these behaviors, it's more frustrating for us because a lot of us are very well-meaning students who don't intend to be difficult or bad students in any way. And when executive dysfunction, now, when it hits its peak, right, when we miss a bunch of emails, when we've missed too many classes, we can start to feel apathetic. And again, that apathy is not coming from a place of genuine disconcern for our well-being. It's coming from a place of overwhelm. I have too many mountains to climb and nobody to help me climb them. So, and again, we'll get into some strategies on how to help manage this with your students with IOCA. Sensory processing disorders and sensitivities. This is a really important one because, again, I think it can get overlooked in our classrooms. So with these challenges, our brain has trouble receiving and responding to any information that comes in through a sense. That can be sight, hearing, touch, taste, smell, etc. So what it's going to look like, you may have students who appear distracted or who appear really anxious or who may even be getting frustrated, sort of without much reasoning. But what that student is experiencing can be incredibly disabling. So A sensory processing disorder can come on as intermittent hearing loss. So we hear it, but our brain isn't processing. It's all jumbled. Another way that this can show itself for students is with an extreme discomfort with the sensory input. Now, what this feels like for me, and what I've heard it described by other neurodiverse people as, is kind of that nails on a chalkboard, spine tingling feeling. So something as simple as a small sound, maybe so small you don't even notice it, or the way the chair feels. These things can cause that horrible sensation over and over again in a student. And maybe the most frustrating part is that you're sitting down or standing in a classroom and it doesn't bother anybody else. You're sort of alone in this experience. Now, when these sensitivities and disorders kind of hit their peak, we have what's called a sensory overload. And a sensory overload means that we are taking in more information than our brain can actually process. So when your brain is getting overwhelmed by that input and that awful feeling, it can enter kind of a fight, flight, or freeze mode. And we can feel unsafe, we can feel in crisis and panicky. And again, this is a totally involuntary thing that our brains and bodies are doing to us that we have no control over. So, on that fun note, communication differences. Communication differences can look like students who are ignoring social cues, maybe talking out of turn or being disruptive, students who seem really overly sensitive or hesitant to get feedback, or even a student who is just unresponsive or silent in your classroom. What it can feel like, though, a lot of times students are unaware or just distracted from social cues, right? We don't intentionally forget the rules of the classroom, but especially when our conditions are triggered, they can cause us to kind of forget the social mores, or with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, people may be totally unaware of them. And again, this is not anything we do intentionally. Rejection sensitive dysphoria is kind of an extension of that. This is something that I know I deal with a lot. For the sake of time, I'll just call it imposter syndrome times 100. Everything I do is wrong, and a small setback makes me feel like I just don't belong here. And again, students who are unresponsive or quiet may be dealing with anxiety or a flashback of a traumatic situation, or just generally these disabling symptoms that neurodiversity can cause. Social differences. Now, again, a social difference is going to be more something that we see in the classroom ecosystem as a whole, rather than something that is interpersonal, although there's a lot of overlap between the two. So what it may look like, you may have a student who's really resistant to group work, a student who's being rude or dismissive to their classmates, or a student like me who can be disruptive and bad at waiting their turn. But what this can feel like for our students. So a lot of us who are neurodiverse can feel isolated or very unaccepted by our peers just because neurodiversity is such an misunderstood topic, I think, in our culture and in our society at large. More than that, we can have students who, when you have communication differences, having a student do a group project where they're required to communicate for a grade can be a really daunting task and communicate well, right? Again, students may be stressed or overwhelmed or dealing with a trigger of their condition. This can cause intense emotional states even that may cause some unintentional behavior that the student is trying to manage in the moment. And again, like I said, we can be forgetful of social cues, or if we're being disruptive, we may be dealing with symptoms that cause us to kind of forget those classroom rules and niceties. Last but not least, I did just want to say, I am glad that we are aware that neurodiversities exist, but acceptance is very different from awareness. Professors who are aware of disabilities deny accommodations every day. So today I want to challenge you. If you want to be the kind of person who accepts neurodiversity in your classroom, take the opportunity to listen to your neurodiverse students. Ask us what we need. It can create a much better learning relationship for both of us. So thank you for having me here today. I believe I went a little or way over time, but we are, I think, going to take some questions before we move on.
Yes, we can take, maybe if you could stop screen sharing, Eliza, and then I can see if there's hand raise functions. Yeah, there we go. So if there happen to be questions after this portion, you can write in the chat or use the raise hand function. Just give people a few moments to see if there's any questions or people would like more on given topics. Yes, Kalani has a question.
Hi, sorry, I was wrangling a cat and I couldn't get my hand up very quickly. I have a quick question about group project work. I try to be sensitive about students who are maybe not comfortable in groups, but I also know that in terms of preparing broad varieties of people for interacting after the academy, that's an important skill to bring into the classroom. Is there a good way to set up group projects that make it less stressful? Is there a recommendation, broadly speaking, for how to manage group activities or group interactions so that they do go well? And then are there particular kinds of things we can do to mitigate them when they go badly?
Yes, there are, and we're going to let Ioka get into it because
Hooray! Okay,
she
thank you.
knows we're going to do a whole slide on this because she knows that I bring it up. It's a major issue for neurodiverse students. And believe me, I am with you on the group work being an important thing. I come from SPIA, the land of group projects. I think I do 4 or 5 a semester, so we understand the importance, but there are things we can do to make them more accessible.
Excellent, thank you. I will hold my patience.
You're good, thank you.
Great. Any other questions after this portion? Okay, I don't think so. So we can turn it over to Ioka or Vlad for the next portion.
Awesome sauce. I want to take just a second, and with anyone who has their camera on, not required, but if anyone wants to turn their camera on for this section, I'm going to give us 10 seconds. And what I want you to do is just do a 10-second dance party with me. So just get silly on camera. I'm just going to count down from 10. So just do some silly movements with me. Okay. So 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you. I literally was about to get paranoid that I didn't know how to count down from 10. So my heart was just beating a little too fast. So that was very paranoid for me on that. So my bad. I should have used that 10 seconds to get my PowerPoint up, but we're just gonna bear with me on that. Okay, cool. So let me hit the slideshow button. I know how to do this. We've been doing Zoom education for 2 years. Okay. Everybody can see it. We're doing great. Okay, cool. So now we will get to the neurodiversity teaching strategies section of the presentation. And there are a couple of things that I would like to highlight as I'm moving forward. The first is an important thing to move forward with, which is as part of the social model of disability, the importance of person first versus identity first language. So if you have an education background like me, my undergraduate degree was a Bachelor's of Science in Education in History, or if you don't, but maybe you've done a little bit of research into disability activism, maybe you've heard a lot about person first education and you think that you're supposed to call us people with disabilities or that Ioka is a person with autism. And I just want to shatter that right now as we move forward. And that the community is actually pushing for identity first language, that you should call us autistic people or you should call us disabled people. And if you're talking to me and Eliza specifically, we like to say we're disabled with a capital D because as Eliza just highlighted, disabled is not a dirty word. And when you use phrases like person with disability or person with autism, you're actually distancing my disability from me. Like it's something you don't want to deal with, like it's an inconvenience for you. And you wouldn't do that with any of my other identities. You wouldn't say Ioka is a person with bisexual. You wouldn't say she's a person with gender fluid. You wouldn't say they are a person with indigenous. All of those things would be homophobic, transphobic, and anti-indigenous. You wouldn't say your Black students are students with Black, right? Hopefully not in 2021. And or 2022, I don't know what year it is. My point is, if you're not going to otherize all of your other students in that way, why are you doing it with disabled people? Now, there is a caveat to that, which is if you are speaking specifically to your disabled students, your neurodiverse students, and they tell you that their personal desire is actually please use person first language with me, then that is their individual desire and you should honor that. But otherwise, it is mine and Eliza and most of the disabled communities at large request to use identity first language instead, because it is really otherizing to sort of attach that like a cape that I can take on and take off. Because while many of these disabilities are invisible, such as you can't tell by looking at me that I'm autistic, that it is really harmful that you want to treat my disabilities like they are invisible, which is why oftentimes our accommodations are not met, which is sort of highlighted by this alphabet soup phenomena. Now, I know you saw this list previously with Eliza, but I sort of like to call the list of neurodivergency, alphabet soup, right? The DSM-5 has all of these letters, and oftentimes you don't get to see these letters because if you are teaching or grading, as most of the graduate students in this room are course auditors, as we are in the history department, you don't get this. What you get is a letter from Disability Services for Students, or DSS, that says you are required to give these legal accommodations. And as we've said, the ADA, or Americans with Disabilities Act, is a floor and not a ceiling. You have to give those accommodations. It is required by law. If it says on that letter, this student needs extra time on assignments, they get double time on tests, you are required by law to give them your PowerPoints ahead of time. You're required to do that. But we're going to talk about universal design being universal and how to make accommodations for all students, because you don't get to see these letters. Okay, you don't know that the reason that that student needs extra time on assignments is because they have massive executive dysfunction from ADHD, or that they need trigger warnings for all of your texts because they have complex post-traumatic stress disorder from multiple traumas throughout their childhood. Or you don't know that the reason they need extra time on assignments is because they have dissociative identity disorder, and it's possible that more than one alter is showing up to your classes and they need to have multiple therapy appointments to have conversations between their alters and their therapist and review their journals in order to get their notes straight across the various alters to know who is actually attending your class and who can actually complete the assignments. You don't know that, right? When you're grading an assignment, you don't know whether that or not that student has dysnomia or dysgraphia and has trouble coming up with nouns. And so when you're telling that student they lose points for poor word choice, whether or not you're being ableist. So we have to reevaluate our grading criteria and make universal design universal, because you don't see the alphabet soup. You see the required letter. You don't see the socioeconomic, racial, gender, or otherwise reasons why they may not have even gotten to their alphabet soup. But the first thing that we want to talk about, which Vlad will get to, is his PhD research on autistic students in the classroom. So I will turn it over to Vlad.
Thank you, Ioka. Hello, everyone. My name is Vlad, and since introduction has been already done, I can jump straight to their presentation. Next slide, please. Today, I'm going to share some of the findings of the study that I conducted, and I'm going to share some of the self-directed strategies that autistic students reported. And overall, I interviewed 11 students. So a lot of literature out there suggests that autistic people most commonly have people with executive functioning. That's what Eliezer describing. And I was trying to understand what strategy students employed to in higher ed settings in order to submit assignments on time, in order to plan and budget the time. So it's very important that syllabi and rubrics are presented in the class in such a manner that allows students to evaluate this scope of the task and budget the time. With that being said, students are using calendar, and it's really it's a student specific strategy, but some of the students just using Canvas as the place that has a notification feature, and once you put this due dates in your assignments, they can also see it. Or some students also, in addition to that, they have Google Calendar, and some of the times they would share that Google Calendar with the tutors to help them manage tasks. So another strategy that student told me was to start early. So students understand that tasks can pile up, and in order to avoid overwhelming amount of work to be done, they try to start as early as possible. And it is true that many people with on a spectrum can struggle with submitting assignments on time. And I'll try to understand why is that happening. And one of the students shared that sometimes a student would intentionally submit the assignment late because of being overwhelmed and just to avoid being burned out. They prefer rather to lose some like 10% and to do late submission than to submit poor quality of work and get overwhelmed with that. So how we can support managing time? First of all, include detailed syllabi, right? So include very specific description in your syllabi that student can gauge the size, the scope, and completion time for the assignments. Outline due dates, and even if you're using face-to-face class, I would recommend that you use Canvas functionality and put due dates, because then this due date will appear in notification settings, and student can be notified via email or whichever preferences they set up. And then remind, like, for example, if you have a large assignment, you could remind like 3 weeks prior or whatever reasonable time prior that this large assignment is coming, and that would be the good time to start working on it. So I also would look at students' strategies. How do they manage tasks? And students reported that most of the time they're trying to like understand the expectations of the task. And what helps often is just to have a summary, like a bullet point list of the assignments and what other, so that they can understand what is required. And how can we support? So even if you have assignment written as a narrative form, you could include in front of the narrative portion some quick reference, like main points that would highlight expectations, time, anything that would help to manage the assignment. And this way, when students will go through narrative description of your assignment, they would have already some ideas about what they're going to read and what they need to accomplish as a part of this assignment. And another thing is the chunk tasks. Usually students on the autistic students, they prefer gradually working towards some large projects. And if you set some soft deadlines and for the large projects, that would allow them to submit portions of that big project, so that you could probably provide them feedback so that they know whether they're not on the right track, and it will also help them evaluate their strategies. So even for face-to-face class, it's really beneficial to record lectures. And students reported that when they know that the lecture is recorded and they can watch it later, they can be more focused on the class. They are not so afraid that they're going to miss anything that that was going on in the class. And in addition to it, they can also, when it comes to complete assignments, some students like watching recordings as they complete the assignment. And another thing that they can also search for the missing part that they didn't understand during the lecture. And some students even reported that they can, do like 2 times speed, like really fast forward to go to specific piece of the lecture that did make sense, and that also helpful. Collaborating with instructors. Overall, students reported that they don't mind asking questions if something is unclear for them, but there were a couple of things that we can make that easier for students to reach out. For example, during the class, some students said that they sometimes refrain from clarifying or asking questions that help them understand the concept, simply because of the fear that they don't want to hold the class up. And this is due to the fact that they're aware that sometimes they might have questions because they either overthink the problem or because some of the students have challenges in audio processing, and they might not understand just one single phrase. And when they clarify the questions, instructor would repeat far back from that point that they didn't understand, and that made them feel bad. And also students heavily rely on actionable feedback. So, and that means that when you provide feedback to students, and if you indicate only points that they lost, that makes it hard to work and improve their understanding of that concept. And it doesn't take much if you just explain in one sentence or two why they lost points. What it does is, even if students don't understand your feedback, at least they have something to base their questions off of, and then they can ask questions, because some students reported that when they don't have any feedback, they don't even know what to ask. So how we can support collaboration? So we can set up designated space and time. So if it's face-to-face class, it can be either very specific time, either in the beginning of the lecture or after a certain portion of the lecture and the end of the lecture, where students can ask questions. Even for face-to-face class, you can use discussion board space, open forum that would be open for the entire semester, where can students exchange questions and learn from each other. Or you can also monitor as an instructor and answer questions that pertain to completion of the assignments or resources or readings for the class. And also students reported that they're more likely to ask the question during the class if they know that other students also have this similar questions. So in other words, when they feel like other students can back them up, that they don't also understand this concept, they feel more confident asking questions. And yeah, give the feedback. I mean, it's recommended that you include at least sentence and two explaining why they lost points. And also it's ideal if you could have some sort of feedback loop where students submit your work, you evaluate it and send them back so that they can work on it and improve, and thus they could get higher grade and higher motivation. Next. So interacting with peers. So there are two things here. So group dynamics. it's also, my studies show that it's also like student specific. Some students prefer working individual due to their, first off, I did this study in STEM, so due to the lab settings, they would love to be like, working individually. But some of the students also said that they don't mind working in the group. And the explanation, what makes group work fruitful is when there is a good group dynamic. That means that when everyone contributing to the group project, students reported to me that they don't like be the one who would pull the group and be like, all right, what's next? What we need to, contribute to the group project. So when everyone is contributed and it goes smooth, that would work quite well then. And instructor check-ins. I mean, student reported when instructor checks in on the group dynamic, how things are working, that's how they associate positive experience with that. So how we can support interaction with peers. So partner activities, some students reported that they don't really feel comfortable when an instructor saying to them, all right, go ahead and find a student to work with, especially in the large classroom. However, it works fairly well when they're in a smaller groups or when the class size is smaller. And also you could schedule check-ins, and there is no specific pattern for those check-ins, as long as students are comfortable with you can gauge how things are going in that group, and you can also, as an instructor, maybe use some strategies to facilitate group discussions and group work. That way everyone will feel comfortable contributing in the group project. So in summary, I would love to say that those little recommendations would help students on a spectrum, autistic students, to go through the classes. And it doesn't take a lot of time or efforts to do so. And another thing that I want to highlight is that by helping one student, we ultimately helping another, and we helping more students. So my portion is done. Do we want to take questions now if we have any questions?
Yes, we will pause for questions on
Okay.
Vlad's research on autistic students, and then I will go into more detail for universal design and strategies for all neurodivergent students.
Perfect.
If there are any questions, I'm double checking the chat real quick.
Okay, I'm also looking.
But also I will stop sharing for just a second so we can use the raise hand
Okay.
function too. That's probably easier. Anyone?
Oh,
Also, you're all welcome.
we
So
have
we have a
question from Tommy.
from Tommy. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That was great. So I have a question about the form of feedback for, or the form of checking in on group dynamics.
Mhm.
Do you have a sense in your research of what, like if there are particular ways of checking in that people are most comfortable with on the spectrum that you've seen in your interviews? Like in the class, asking like the whole group, or like email or something like that?
Thank you for that question. First off, I also would like to say that I put together a very short summary with suggestions at a separate document that I'm going to share in addition to the presentation. But answering your question, it's great. Like I said, there is no like specific strategy with checking in. What students were reporting to me is that as long as they sense that instructor is involved and an instructor is honoring concerns and sort of like part of that discussion, they know if they can be heard should something goes not as it was planned. So that's what the main important thing. So that and overall, I guess you can do it like in a more natural way. I mean, as an instructional designer, because it's also who am I, that's the job what I'm doing. I would recommend you can just set the time with each group and sort of like, it depends also on your project, if they need to, and you can see like by the contribution, or if it's a project that, I don't know, if students are required to find some information, and then if you set up the role, you can just maybe observe their group and see if everyone is contributing, how comfortable everyone with doing their roles. Because I know sometimes role could be, some people can, like, for example, if the outcome is their essay or like a paper, some people could assign somebody who will coordinate the group, someone who would do like searching the material, and another person would just edit this information. And you can just, as an instructor, making sure that people are fine with these roles that you assign, and it's functions well. But with education, I don't like to give like prescription and giving like straight recommendations how to do that. I guess as long as you as instructor, you know, open the door and create the room for them to reach out to you should something is unclear, not working, how you set it up, that will be good enough. I think we have another questions too.
I don't think you're, there we go. Yeah.
So no, I was waiting to be called on because
Yeah.
I've had years of education. So in recording lectures, there is an
Mhm.
assumption that you're teaching in a very traditional way, that is, you're actually lecturing. And I talked to some people who teach at Gallaudet, and given that it's a multilingual university with many deaf students and also others, they have camera systems in their classrooms, and they record all their classes from like about a gazillion angles. What do you suggest for those of us who are who teach more interactive classes? And some of that, I think, may be create some sensory overload for some students with stuff coming from all different directions, but it also presents an issue for recording because we're not actually, the action is not all in one place. So do you have some suggestions there?
Yeah. Well, thank you for your question, first of all. And yes, that's what I said. Those recommendations are very like specific to a classroom. Like if you have more interactive classroom, I assume like example could be if you are sort of adhere to inquiry-based learning, or if you have like more problem-based learning kind of set up where students, more student-centered activities, you can then, what's the point of a report is that student can reference that material should they miss something. So it's, for example, you can make sure that they can then access the information that you present in the classroom in more than one way. Maybe you can give some, maybe you can supply some like, I don't know, checklist or like PowerPoint beforehand, or something that students can have and know that, all right, this is like my base. That's what I am basing my information off of. And that would allow them to focus more what's going on in the classroom, because they know that, all right, it's because if they have nothing, if it just like, I don't know, if you, for example, read the article, come in the class and then split in the groups and discuss, then, or like, for example, if you introduce a new concept, and if there is like nothing that they can look at later on, but only their notes, that's where the point of recording it. So you can supply some other information for them, or if it's, I guess that's class specific recommendations, but overall, long story short, as long as they could access either alternative to what was said verbally to reference as they prepare for assignments or as they refresh what happened in the class. That's what I would recommend.
I also added my input in the chat as well, which I will sort of go into a bit more detail in my slides as well. Are there any further questions on this section? Alrighty, I'm not going to make you all dance again before I talk, unless you want to. Okay, I will go back to screen sharing then. All right, maybe. There we go. All right, so back to other strategies for the rest of the neurodiversity spectrum. A couple of reminders that the ADA is the law. And so whatever accommodations you are told in your letter from DSS, you are required to give those. So full stop, you are giving those. But a reminder that the Americans with Disabilities Act is a floor and not a ceiling. So we are actually encouraging you to go beyond whatever that letter is giving you instructionally. But before you start to panic and say, Ioka, please don't give me any more work. Like, I'm on a million committees, or I'm a graduate student and I'm grading and teaching and studying for comps and or trying to write an entire dissertation and defend it. This is why we're telling you about universal design principles, because universal design means universal. And so if your syllabus is already written to be accessible and with universal design principles, then it's actually not going to cause you any additional burdens to, first of all, incorporate the accommodations you're being told to incorporate in that mandatory floor by DSS, but all of the other accommodations that you want to do are already built into your syllabus, and it's actually not that hard for you to universally accommodate students of various disabilities, physical or mental. So one of the first things I want to talk about, which is useful, those of you who are currently in the process of writing a syllabus course request for the Collins LLC, I know there are several of you because I saw you in that meeting a couple weeks ago, but also if you're in a course request, submitting a course or writing a syllabus for the fall semester, what I have on this screen right now is my version of what is in my syllabus for the accommodations section in the university policy. So where you have like your attendance policy, your late work policy, you know, all those sorts of things. So as I said, you are required to give DSS accommodations. So the first sentence is, you know, all DSS accommodations will be honored. But I encourage you to go beyond and say, look, students, whatever language you want, this is my version. Laura also has a version of this, and hers is, you know, many more paragraphs. So I didn't want to like give you much more wall of text, although hers is also brilliant. That says, look, you can come to me as a student and tell me if you need accommodations. That you do not need to tell me your private mental health information. In fact, please do not. That's a HIPAA violation. I mean, it's not a HIPAA violation if you voluntarily tell me the information, but it is a HIPAA violation for you to ask a student to divulge private medical health information. So, you know, but you can discuss, you have a need. So you can just tell me, hey, you know, I just need extra time on this assignment and I will give you grace. A lot of universal design principles are just believing students, subpoint A, and subpoint B is having grace and recognizing that we all struggle. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we are all struggling right now. There is almost nobody getting by in this pandemic without a mental health struggle right now. So at the very least, we should understand that some people need more time, that some people are going through stressful and traumatic encounters, and that it may take them extra time or extra care or other things to get them through just the texts, right? How many of us wondered if covering texts in a history of slavery class or history of Black activism class was going to be traumatic for our students, especially our Black students in our classes? How many of us issued content warnings for, you know, violent depictions of anti-Black violence in our classroom? How many of us issued those? Those are universal design principles that you can give out to your students that require, I mean, maybe an extra email, but otherwise no extra work for you. Those sorts of things. So what I want to talk about are some teaching strategies that you can implement classroom-wide that are universal design. And one of the core principles of universal design is that you're not trying to fix a disability, you're trying to make your classroom climate more accessible for everyone, regardless of where they're coming from. So first I want to talk about nonverbal communication. So ways that students can communicate to you that they're struggling or need additional help without telling you they need additional help. One of my favorite strategies I used as a classroom teacher that I especially liked as a neurodivergent teacher, but also was given as a neurodivergent student, was sticky notes. So on my syllabus, I actually have under required materials some sticky notes of bright colors, doesn't matter what color, because it's very easy for a student to place a hot pink sticky note on their notebook, on the front side of their desk, on the back of their laptop that's facing you. And that just says, hey, don't call on me today, no questions asked. Like I can't today. And that requires no communication to each other. And that's an easy way for you to know. Also, this one isn't necessarily nonverbal, but having office hours as an option for participation. We talk a lot about participation, and oftentimes participation is almost 50% of a course grade. But how many times do we diversify what participation means? It doesn't always have to be physically talking in a class. It can mean coming to office hours to digest a text. As Vlad's research showed, autistic students in particular want to engage with an approachable professor. If you have office hours open as an option for nonverbal participation, first of all, it allows students to come to you and say, I'm struggling with this text and I felt very insecure about feeling stupid and not understanding a concept of a text in the classroom, especially if you're reading like Horton Spillers or Sadia Hartman in a classroom, and or Mark Rifkin, and your students are like, what do you mean by multiple temporalities, or what is critical fabulation? And they just feel stupid asking those sorts of questions in the classroom. So having your office hours open as also part of, like, not mandatory for participation grade, but an alternative, makes it another accessible option. It's also important for you to have written and verbal instructions. This is especially necessary in a virtual world. If you are giving verbal instructions over Zoom, especially before using breakout rooms, you need to have those instructions written either on Canvas or copy and pasted into the Zoom chat so that students know that. I can guarantee you your ADHD students will immediately forget those instructions the second you send them to a breakout room. And that's even worse when you have sent 3 students with ADHD directly to the same breakout room and they all get there and they're like, what are we doing? And then now they have lost learning opportunities that were easily solved by both written and verbal instructions. I also recommend discussion boards, but with a caveat. You should not make mandatory discussion boards every week because these will lead to executive dysfunction and overload and emotional overwhelm that Eliza talked about. But having discussion boards open up semester long that are alternatives to in-class participation will help your nonverbal students feel like they can still participate without having to verbally participate in the class. If you want to make discussion boards a required part of your class, I recommend close reading style assignments. So instead of having a weekly response assignment, you should think about having them do a depth versus breadth assignment. So instead of having 16 assignments due throughout the semester, maybe 5 or 8 assignments where they think critically about the text. And instead of just saying, please report on what was the author's main argument, how did they use evidence, whatever the typical 5 questions we historians often ask of our students. Instead, we ask them to deeply engage or think critically across 3 texts, have them think with those 3 texts together, the same way we would for our qualifying exams, honestly, even for undergraduates. And that has them think critically and in less assignments. And that combats executive dysfunction as well as verbal classroom climate stressors and social classroom climate stressors. Finally, any movement strategies you have in in-person classrooms are 100% inaccessible, especially for people with, or for physically disabled individuals, but more importantly for neurodivergent students. As I mentioned, ADHD students are going to forget your instructions. Students with auditory processing disorders probably forgot the instructions. Even if you are following my written and verbal instructions and have them posted on a projector, you're still forcing autistic students to walk around your classroom. They may be physically touching students, causing sensory overload. There's just a ton of reasons why these sorts of strategies are totally problematic. So I recommend not using them, especially the ones that are like, do you strongly agree? Move to this side of the room. Do you slightly agree? Move to this side of the room. Those cause me autistic panic because I overthink the question. I'm like, well, what's the difference between strongly agree and only slightly agree? Other ways that you can think, or think broadly across your classroom. Dimming the lights, but not having them off can help with sensory processing. Offering trigger warnings. Putting breaks in your classrooms, even if they're not 2.5 hour long lectures. Offering free unstructured breaks. So having a freedom of a movement policy of your classroom so students can just like leave and go to the bathroom. Offering roadmaps in advance. You have a roadmap for your classroom. Make sure that's accessible to your students. I'm not trying to be the Indiana law that's like, put all of your lesson plans up in a year in advance. But I am saying that you should have your syllabus open on the first day of class. Changes to that syllabus should be communicated at least 2 weeks in advance so your autistic students don't panic that our routine has been disrupted. Also, allow laptops. It is extremely inaccessible to just have a no laptops policy in your classroom. If your policy is that students will be on Facebook or students will be watching golf, et cetera, and they aren't focusing on your class, that is that student's choice. They are paying to be in your classroom. Therefore, they are paying for their right to be on Facebook and watch golf instead. If you're worried about that student distracting other students, then you can make a statement instead that's like, if you're making the choice not to pay attention to my class, please move to the back of the classroom. But what you shouldn't do is just deny outright that accommodation to all of your students, because as we said, they may not have the ability to get a diagnosis and get DSS accommodations that allow them to have a letter sent to you that demands the right to have a laptop in your classroom. So I have physical and mental disabilities that require me not to be on a laptop in the classroom, but Eliza, for example, is required to be on a laptop to alleviate her disabilities. And she has had the harassment of professors deny her accommodation and faces the same traumas that our original video would have explained to you. So please do not be another perpetuator of that violence on this campus. Also, providing PowerPoints at least a day in advance is a wonderful accommodation because it allows students to print off your PowerPoints so they can take notes next to the PowerPoint slides. And that way they don't have to worry about copying down the text of your PowerPoint and the words that you're saying at the same time. And stimming, I want to talk about stimming. So that wonderful 10-second dance that we all did together is a version of stimming. Stimming is when all students, neurodivergent or neurotypical, have behaviors or sounds or body movements or things to either regulate over or under stimulation. Now, everybody does this. We call it stimming. Neurotypicals call it vibing. So if you hear a good song and you're like, oh yeah, I'm going to vibe to this. Or you're so excited about something that you're waving your hands and you're like, I really have to talk with my hands. That's stimming. You should not discourage this in your classroom. In fact, you should encourage it. It makes really good transitions. We all did it together. It was a good debrief. It was a good break in between Eliza and my and Vlad's portions of this conversation. You can channel it. If you have students in your classroom that are constantly raising their hands and interrupting, that's not a deviant behavior. They just need to manage their stimming. There's a parking lot strategy. Those sticky notes I love so much, you can have them write down their name or their question on a sticky note and park it in the front of the classroom or on their desk. And then they can pick it up and ask the question when you have time for questions in your lecture. There are virtual moderators. You can assign someone in your classroom to be the moderator of the chat. More importantly, believe stimming. Don't punish it. Don't force it. If they tell you that there's a bad texture, like the paper you're printing is bad, so you need to make sure your handouts are accessible. There are lots of different ways. And model stimming. Vibe to good music in class. That's not required. That's just me saying that's a good idea. Model stimming. It makes those of us who stim frequently feel more comfortable doing it. And my slide on group work, Kalani, here you go. Okay, so group work. If you are wedded to having group work in your classroom, follow the things Vlad already said, but consider assigning roles. So for example, you could specifically, so when you're assigning your groups, you say, all right, student A is going to be the editor, student B is the group leader, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And don't just say you need one of each. Assign the specific students the specific roles. This isn't just an accessibility accommodation. It also fights other forms of systematic oppression. For example, if you are assigning these, then that also fights back against the why are all the cishet white men always the group leaders in group work sort of problem. Have the option to let students work alone. As Eliza tried to highlight, we aren't being intentionally difficult. We just sometimes have autistic panic about group work. And I understand that you want to teach us life skills, but we have been taught the same forced upon us life skill all through K-12 and through graduate school. If we haven't learned to work in groups, we're not going to learn it. More importantly, it's forced like social anxiety and other things that are making the project like uncohesive for us. So that's an option. If it's literally incompatible with your assignment, then follow the other things. But have the group work together frequently throughout the semester. So instead of just having one group project at the end, have the group work together frequently so that they can develop social dynamics. The autistic students, for example, can learn how to read the other students in the class, can learn how to mask if necessary, can learn how to be safe in the social situation. You as the professor have an obligation to watch the group dynamic and check in, as Vlad said. But I ask you to really honestly consider if group work is truly necessary and if the life skill you're trying to teach can be learned in other ways, whether it's through small discussions as opposed to like an actual project that our grade or a significant portion of our grade is hanging on, because that can cause us a lot of societal anxiety, especially if we're mostly concerned about rejection sensitive dysphoria or, you know, overdoing too much work or doing too little work for the group. There's just a lot of problems with group work for neurodiverse students. And finally, I want to talk about the bystander effect. You have a lot of power in the classroom, either as a professor or as a grader for graduate students. A lot of these are invisible disabilities, but the ableism we experience is visible. If students are making fun of us, if they're laughing at us because we always have our hand up, if they're snickering, you know, those sorts of things, there's a right and wrong way to respond to it. You have a moral obligation to say something, to do something about it, to not gaslight students, to not say things like, I think you're just a little panicky. Maybe you just have some anxiety. Like, first of all, generalized anxiety disorder is neurodivergence. That's a ableist thing to say to us. But also, if the student has the confidence to confront you about it, please actually be an ally and not be a bystander to the violence we're experiencing in your classroom, because you are creating a classroom climate that's allowing that to happen. So you have the ability to correct that classroom climate. Finally, be an actual ally, or better yet, be an accomplice. Be aware of HIPAA violations, which I've talked about. Ask your students how you can be an ally and accomplice, and listen to your students when we give you that feedback. I am happy to take questions. Oh my gosh, there's so much in the chat.
Thanks, Ayoka. So we'll monitor the chat, and if you have questions about, Eliza mentioned happy to take questions on the laptop policy. I know there's differing opinions about how to do that sometimes, or other maybe situations you've come across in discussion sections or office hours, and you're wondering how you might handle them in the future, things like that. We're happy to hear from you. We have about 10 minutes or so before the event is scheduled to end. Yes, Kalani.
I'll cede the floor to Laura because I already asked a question and I've got a follow-up.
Okay, I'm gonna have to go in a minute, but I just wanted to say in the moment of silence while people are getting their questions together, and I may have some later that I'll come back to you guys with. Thank you so much. This was beautifully organized and impeccably presented, and I just learned a ton. So thank you all for taking the time to, educate us and doing it, just so well. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for coming. We appreciate it. I know I personally appreciate the opportunity to get to bridge this gap, right? And try to make the world a little bit better for other neurodiverse students. So
Yeah. Oh, Judith has a question.
You're muted.
Oh, you're muted, Judith.
Several times, the phrase has been used about the importance of seeing the Americans with Disabilities Act as a floor, not a ceiling. I'm curious about what picture the community discussing this has about how to make that beyond a aspiration, how to make that real, or how to make that effective in terms of dealing with university authorities, the relevant bodies that deal with all of this, because I think that's really important as part of the issue about students who, you know, you're frightening statistics about how few people who are dealing with all of this are actually getting the letters, doing the stuff, and it's obvious what all the reasons are, but I'm wondering about the external forces that could happen to possibly mitigate that some, alter that some. What else could happen, do you think, that could make that that floor come up, get us closer to things? What do you think?
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Allen. I'm happy to elaborate, and I'm sure Eliza is too. So there are a couple of ways that we say the floor is not a ceiling, and I'll give you some material examples and then some like dream examples. So material examples.
I like dreams.
Right. So some material examples and ways that in which this has played out. For example, as Eliza and I both have service dogs, and I think service dog law is a beautiful example in which this happens. So all states and cities are required to abide by the ADA and what it says about service dogs. However, under the ADA, service dogs in training are not covered. However, in the state of Indiana, in the city of Bloomington, and several other states, service dogs in training do have access rights, which is why, you know, ICANN has those students who are not disabled training service dogs, because service dogs in training, if with their trainers and if training the dog, do have rights. And so that's going beyond the ADA to, so what we're saying is you can never be more restrictive than the ADA, but what you can be is more expansive. You can give more rights. The same is true for like the American Civil Rights Act or the Indian Civil Rights Act, right? You cannot give us less civil rights, but you can always give us more. And so that's what we're saying is in your classroom, you are required by law to give accommodations. You cannot give anything less, but you can give more. You can give accommodations to all your students, whether or not they have documentation.
Right.
And that's my dream.
I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, it seems to me some of what you're talking about is, I guess I'm curious about what you think the balance is between what you're just describing there, which is a volitional using one's imagination, right? And just thinking more broadly what also might help. Let's multiply this, let's enhance this, let's enlarge this, versus more actual legislative stipulations, policy, prescriptions. Do you think those things work in tandem? Do you think one's more important than the other? You know, I don't know. It's just the problem.
This would be my entire field of research. I'm so glad you brought this up. So I think we have to have a balance. I think in the United States, we have a massive cultural inefficiency, right? I think that we don't know how to talk about disability, and we don't know how to think about disability as something we incorporate into kind of everyday, right? So like Ayoko was saying, that universal design principle, we need to, I mean, we need awareness, we need allyship, and those things are what is going to create the policy change. So I think policy is important. Oh, go ahead. Do you have something, Cecilia?
Oh, go ahead. When you're done.
So I was just going to say that we won't see policy change until we see social change, right? Because, and the social change is more important, I think, to me right now than the policy change, and that'll upset some people at SPIA, so don't quote me to them. But because we already have policies, right? And they aren't working. We have accommodation memos, for instance, but people don't follow them. We have the ADA, but for instance, another startling statistic for you. And this is K through 12 because nobody checks this at the university level, but of our K through 12 schools, 60% of our school districts report having at least one major ADA violation right now. A majority of our public schools are not in compliance with the ADA. And so as a policy scholar, that says to me, right, in theory, in a democracy, we aren't giving enough social pressure behind this. I think that the squeaky wheel gets fixed. And clearly our disability management of those laws and policies has lagged, I mean, decades behind. Our floor is cracking, right? We don't even have a good foundation under the floor we have.
Right. Forget the base. Yeah, right. It's not the ground floor, it's the basement. Yeah, okay. Very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you.
I hope that answered your question. Again, ADHD.
Well, it does. Yeah, what it does is tell me that this is, I mean, there are so many social movements where you can think about exactly the same thing. Does social, is law always a lagging indicator behind a change consciousness, or are there cases where a changed law raises consciousnesses? And, in American history, everybody knows the big debate about people saying, well, African Americans, these slaves aren't asking for a vote. We don't need to give them a vote. If they're asking for it, like any other people, we will give it to them, but they're not asking for it. When in fact, the so-called amendment, a lot of people argue then that changed thinking about things. I don't know. I just don't know what, but I think if people don't have to have a reason for thinking about something until a law sits in their face and says, you got to do this.
True.
And I'm just,
to maybe amend my previous kind of discussion here is, I think with the ADA, our big deal is not even necessarily that we need more law, but that we need more enforcement, right? We don't have enforcement. Students don't have any equitable dispute system. I maybe shouldn't tell you this, but students, when an accommodation is denied, there's no good, effective way that really works with the university community for them to challenge that decision. They are ultimately powerless, I mean, in my view. And so I think if we have enforcement and real consequences, that may start to get people to see that this is a serious topic.
Yeah,
I'd like to also address this maybe in a little bit of a different way, which is just to say that, what you're raising is really why the Neurodiversity Coalition exists. And, it is our mission to promote inclusivity campus-wide and in the community. The Neurodiversity Coalition actually was born out of an instructor who made a very disparaging comment to a McDonald's worker. And that was caught on videotape. And at any rate, the Neurodiversity Coalition to an undergraduate student and a faculty got together and decided that it was, time to address these types of issues. So if you're interested in, and the reason that this presentation is in existence is because Laura found out about our organization and came to us and said, hey, I'd like you to do this with us, do this presentation, help us out. Well, you guys really did the presentation, but if you are interested in getting notifications about what is happening with the Neurodiversity Coalition, please put your email in the chat and I'll put you on the list, and then you can see what we're up to. The College of Arts and Sciences also puts out information about activities that are going on through campus, and we're on their list. And you might have seen that Dr. Carmen Hene-Ochoa was here for most of the presentation because she's very interested in bringing this to the broader college.
Thanks. And I understand we're at 4:30, so if people have to go, that's the official end of our event. Absolutely no worries there, but we have a question from Maria, so if you can stay on, please feel free.
Yeah, some of us will be staying later to continue to take questions. So.
Yeah, thanks.
So first of all, I just want to thank you for this very rich set of presentation. The discussion was fabulous. I'm really hoping that we'll be able to collect the materials. Kalani's still here. And we have a Canvas site for the history department, at least, that started with teaching during the pandemic and kind of sharing all sorts of research and resources for better pedagogy. And I would love for us to be able to bring that to the rest of the department. I also want to say on behalf of History and Gender Studies, I'm part of both communities, that I would love for our diversity and equity committees to become more cognizant and to engage more with these issues in the way that we express ourselves about not just floors, but also aspirations. And finally, as Cecilia mentioned, Carmen was here before. I'm on the DIAC committee working with graduate students on developing mentoring best practices and policies that bring attention to various forms of minoritizing students and the way that we engage with them, not just in the classroom, but outside as fully articulated human beings. And so I think that what you brought to our meeting today is very valuable for that group. I don't want to make anybody do more work. I feel like I'm the person who should be doing more work for you, because that's my job and I get paid for it. But if folks in this group have interest in becoming engaged with the DIAC committee and bringing these issues more to our attention, front and center, I would love to mediate and to kind of bring you along or I speak about these issues with them and see if we can move the mountain. I think the biggest issue from what I've worked with a number of students who have expressed the kind of frustrations that you're expressing in the way that you're talking about the classrooms. And I think a lot about is about the resources that the university puts, or rather doesn't put, towards raising that floor.
Completely agree.
We have fees for, all sorts of things like sports.
Go off. Yeah.
For this.
Yeah. Let's do a little fundraising and maybe a little bit of an accessibility fee. Imagine that, right?
Yeah, I'm down with that.
Making everybody care about the fact that we can all access all of our buildings.
Yeah.
I mean, the brand new SPIA building had ADA violations on day one, it's just so out of the entire conversation on this campus, I think. Even for the policy people, we just don't think about it.
Yeah. So talking the talk and walking the walk, or whatever,
Exactly. No, exactly. Actions and words. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks,
and
Corinne.
I'd love to be involved with anything further conversations. I love doing this stuff.
Eliza, awesome. I will just have to be in touch.
Yeah, I'll connect everybody that's on the panel with Maria.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, and we can put you in email touch. And I'll also say, Maria, to that point and to Judith's, that's where I came from with approaching people to make this panel. There was no training for me as an instructor on neurodiversity and how to accommodate that in the classroom. So that's really where this presentation was born out of. And yeah, go ahead.
Can I ask this question? Because it's important to my research and just a small little study here. Raise your hand if you got some kind of course or formal instruction on how to actually provide accommodations. One? Do I have one?
I can tell you about my attempts to educate myself with the ADA folks, which was like a Monty Python skit, basically.
Yeah.
How that one went. Yeah.
No, you're being asked to think about this from like a lawyer side of things, which is what I hope to be one day. We're asking you to impart or use a federal law, but we give you no training on how to do it.
Correct.
Isn't that wild?
The same as with software or anything else we're supposed to do.
True.
We're just let loose.
Very true.
Yep.
Very true. I didn't think about it that way. Ooh, food for thought. Thank you.
Kalani, do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. I have one follow-up that I wanted to ask. So a couple of years ago, actually, this is probably more than a year because the pandemic 2.5 years is 1 year. I did a class with the School of Ed on universal design, and I've switched to using spec grading and ungrading depending on the size of the class. And so that's how I handle group work now. I do ungrading with reflections only as the graded part so that I can do the group project, but not actually grade that for stress purposes. But I'm wondering if you all have a preferred assessment system that you use or that you like as a student, because I don't know how people receive that. I know sort of vaguely what happens when I'm in conversations, but that's all anecdote.
So yes. First of all, yes, love that. Second, this is a hot take that I recognize is even controversial in like ed circles, much less the history department. So those of you that may evaluate my application to teach courses, turn off your ears. I'm just kidding. So I am a huge advocate for standards-based grading. So I'm that. So and as an autistic person, it is the biggest stress relief for me. I think number grades and letter grades are extraordinarily arbitrary, especially in graduate school. First of all, if you're teaching graduate courses, there's either the everybody gets an A or there's like discrimination based on who doesn't get the A. And in my experience, I don't know if that's everybody's experience. So to me, as an autistic learner, standards-based grading is very clear. Like, here's the standard, here's the expectation. You either meet it, exceed it, or go below it. And even within though, there's, you know, standards for what is meeting the expectation, what is exceeding the expectation, what is, you know, the varying degrees of not meeting the expectation. And I've even seen, you know, on education TikTok, I can't believe I'm citing education TikTok right now, but I am. I've even seen people equating standards-based grading to letter grades for the sake of like, you know, I teach at a prep school and I have to give letter grades, which is also what I had to do before the ages of TikTok when I was a classroom teacher, and, you know, had to do it because my district was like, we won't allow standards-based grading. And I was like, you will, you just aren't going to know about it. And so I am always going to be an advocate for standards-based grading. Whether or not I'm allowed to is a separate question. So I don't know, and I can't speak for other neurodivergent people. I haven't run a study on it, but at least for me, it took away so much of the panic, because so much of rejection sensitive dysphoria is, what did I do wrong? Is it about me? No one can tell me why, and I'm panicking. But if I can attach it to, here is why, and that actionable feedback piece that Vlad was talking about is right there in front of me in the standards. And also there's not all of these various ranges of numbers that don't make sense. It's either 3, you did it, 4, you did it better, or less than 3, you didn't do it. And then it's solely accountable to me, and it's just not all of that. And in group work, I think is the perfect experience for that, especially if you're doing reflection-based grading and not like, my grade is dependent upon whether or not these people I don't have social relations with did a good job. That is so much better. So standards-based grading, and then the system it seems like you're already doing sounds perfect. Also shout out to Digital Humanities, love your work. But yeah, so that's my feedback. I'm happy to hear from the other people on the panel about how they feel. But that's my hot take. I will always cap for standards-based grading. So there you go.
I guess I'll say very quickly, one time as a grader, actually with Judith's class, for smaller assignments, we had 3 grade values, which is what Ayoka was talking about. You met it, you exceeded it, you went below it. And they really seemed to resonate with students. They could really understand those concepts. It made almost more intuitive sense to them in some ways than the very fine gradations between letter grades. And I got the idea from Barbara Cross Davis, like this big teaching book that I have. And she cites research, might be a little outdated now, that it seems to also make a lot of sense to students too. There's probably types of assignments that doesn't make as much sense for, but I'm using it in my Collins class this semester. So
it makes me happy to know that Judith's class is using that too. So yeah.
Any other questions or last comments here? We've gone a little over, but we just want to give folks as much time as we can.
I have a question specifically for the graduate students in the room. Are there any concerns you all have as course auditors that we can help you with? Because I know as history graduate students, we grade so much all the time. And so we don't have a lot of autonomy to, you know, help neurodivergent students. So do you all have concerns that you think we could help you with to help neurodivergent students, like as your role as course auditor? I know we've given you a ton of strategies when you're actually teaching, but as a grader, do you have concerns that we might be able to help alleviate? Yeah, Brock.
Yeah, I do have a question that kind of relates, just in terms of kind of writing comments, you know, while grading. I mean, I think we're often asked to write kind of comments about a lot of different things, you know, the kind of content, as well as mechanics and kind of overall flow just in the history department in terms of grading essays a lot of the time, or kind of essay-based, paragraph-based kind of worksheets and that kind of stuff. And you all have provided some just fantastic tips, I think, on like how to do actionable feedback. But I was just kind of thinking for a while now in terms of, you know, sort of a triage in terms of like what to foreground. In addition, I know, Vlad, you mentioned like being really brief, you know, in terms of feedback, but in terms of kind of content versus like mechanics, is there, you know, and those are kind of artificial categories that kind of feed into each other. But if there's, is there something that should maybe come first, or that you found that, you know, has been maybe helpful in your grading, I don't know, IOCA or in interactions with students at all?
Yeah. Subpoint A is compliment sandwiches. I think for students with rejection sensitive dysphoria, it's really important that you foreground good content and end on good content. Otherwise, they're definitely going to leave with "I did terrible," even if you only had one bad thing to say and the rest was positive. If you don't compliment sandwich, it's not going to be good. So that's subpoint A. Subpoint B is really think about, you know, actionable feedback, but what does the purpose of your content do? So if you're talking about our awkward word choice, or, you know, this isn't doing what you want it to do, that feedback means nothing to us if you don't give us advice on how to actually fix it, because we may not know what's awkward about word choice or how to fix the words, especially because us autistic folks, we are very specific about our words and we're choosing words very carefully. So if you don't get it and we have had an autistic miscommunication, we literally don't know how to fix it. And so that's subpoint B. Subpoint C is you have to, like, what I would do is when you send back the feedback, send a reminder, here is when my office hours are to talk about it, because they know where to find that information, but they may not know the office hours are an option. They may just need a reminder that office hours are an option. If you have the spoons, maybe just being like, here are times when I'm available for appointments, especially if you can sense that that student's going to need additional help. Isabel, yes, please follow up via email. And so those are my like top 3 pieces of advice, but I'll let Eliza finish up for me.
Yeah, so really just jumping off of office hours in general and how important they are, something I'm kind of wanted to say earlier is that for those of us who have social anxiety, or for instance, I have physical disabilities, so like my head doesn't turn at all. You may have noticed me using a little sign language here and there. Asking us to come to your office hours and then letting us have that conversation with you can actually mitigate social anxiety in class, right? Once I have that rapport with you and I know that, you know, and it helps temper my, you know, rejection sensitive dysphoria as well. Once I have that rapport with you, I know that I can ask you these questions. It means that I know that it means that I can speak up in class and I don't have to worry as much about the feedback I'm going to get. And that may have been a little too off topic, but
Oh, thank you both very much.
Not at
That's
all.
very helpful.
Not at all.
Yeah.
okay.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you all.
Yeah.
We have a question from Hannah.
Yeah, thank you. This is all really, really helpful. I guess specifically because you asked for questions from the perspective of grading, even when, because I've been an assistant instructor a few times, as a grader or like an instructor working with a professor, there's only so much power I have to be able to implement these kinds of things. I've actually run into in the past with like laptops, sort of introducing, because I didn't have all of this sort of presented to me to be helpful with it, but sort of introducing, hey, like, restricting students from laptops could be a problem. There's some disability issues and just getting rejected. Obviously, I can't. How do we sort of bridge these things that professors are working with? Is there information we can give them, right? Because that's also right. If the ADA is like, if that's the floor, laptop isn't something they have to do for them. And in my experience, a lot of professors, that's their main sticking point that they really don't feel comfortable budging on for some reason.
Okay, can I help with that just on one thing? Maria, are you still here? Maria, no, she's gone. Is she? In gender studies a few years ago, the director of the chair of the department banned uses of laptops in a class because there were incidents like this guy was stalking this young woman and he sat in front of her with pornographic sites. Wherever she sat in the room, he sat in front of her and she couldn't even see the room for these sites. He was doing all kinds of stalking of it outside the classroom, but that's what he did inside the classroom. And the other thing that happened was that the AIs in the classroom kept seeing students shopping, booking their next trip, doing all this kind of stuff. And they just got really angry about the effect this was having. They were causing major disruption in the class, and people just got really annoyed about it and said, okay, you take notes or you go read the lecture later, but you're not doing this in the classroom. So, I mean, it was very much a question of a safe space for women to learn, quite literally. But what you said today, it seems to me now it's really obvious you could handle that another way. But I think a lot of professors just don't know what the point you're making. You would then weigh that up against that. But that was the argument, certainly, that I heard there. My colleague Carl Lipson said, I don't care if people are shopping. If other people are disrupted, they can change seats. So he doesn't care. I personally think if you want to go shopping, why don't you go and if you want to book your next trip or do shopping, there are really nice coffee shops you could go to. Why would you occupy space in my classroom and distract other people? This isn't very smart. So there's lots of possible responses. But what you're saying, the need for it in certain cases, I just think professors don't know. They've never heard this. So why I was asking quietly about policy and cultural change, if the system required every class to have someone come and tell them this, and that's a lot of labor too, or if there was some way that communicated, I think a lot of people would rethink that, but they just don't know. I think there's just massive, massive ignorance out there. And think about it, no one's born knowing this stuff, so it's not surprising that there is ignorance about it. You could call it ableism if it makes you feel better, but it's just actually, it hasn't been encountered, I think. Because you're only going to see it and think, oh yeah, of course, right, this makes total sense.
Just
what it's worth.
Yeah, no. And one point on laptop policies, pretty much every university, I've been to 3 different universities now, and IU has this policy as well. If we misuse our laptops that we are allowed to have in the classroom, we can have that accommodation taken away. And so I think that it's kind of reasonable to say, oh, well, you're not actually, students who are not actually using their laptop for studying or learning. I think it's fair to tell them, I need you to sit in the back of the classroom. I need you to close that or focus on notes. That's the standard we hold everybody to, and yeah, that's more labor and that sucks.
Right, sure.
But
yeah.
I think it's fair, right? If
Sure.
that's something that I have to be afraid of, having my laptop open in a classroom, then I think it's fair to hold everybody to that standard.
Right. Hannah, apologies. I interrupted you when I offered that aside, just trying to explain why sometimes some people had done this, but you were in the middle of making another point, so please go ahead.
No, that was mostly my question, is just how to sort of, sorry, there are cats everywhere. How to sort of have that conversation, especially because, like, as you notice, like, and even the idea of like policing it from the classroom as sort of a severely underpaid and overworked sort of grader and sort of assistant instructor. There's not like, it's just, I think sometimes maybe it's just the power dynamic of sort of someone beneath them sort of, hey, these are, I would suggest this sort of thing, but even knowing, see, I didn't realize that accommodation could get taken away for that kind of thing. So even sort of suggesting
that's helpful to know. That's helpful to know.
Or even having these sort of resources to hand over, I guess would be useful. Sorry, my question may not be answerable. It was just a concern I had because I've brought it up with professors in the past who were not into it.
Some professors are lucky. They get to work with people like Laura, and she just says, you know what, it'd be better if we did this one. I go, okay.
That's right. I think we are going to make this presentation, Hannah, available to history faculty and grad students. And so hopefully they'll see it. But we also hope that trainings like this will be mandatory across the College of Arts and Sciences at some point. And so hopefully down the line, this doesn't help you today, but your professors will have had access to this information, and it doesn't put you in the situation where you're trying to change the course on something.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Hannah. I think maybe one last question, but we want to let everybody go because there is an HGSA meeting on Zoom at 5 as well. So if nobody has any other questions or comments, thanks so much to those who stayed. Thanks so much for coming on a Friday. We appreciate it. And Cecilia, if you could stop recording, I think that'll do it for today. Thanks everyone so much.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks.
Thanks.